Hello, and a very warm welcome to the Understanding Users podcast, brought to you by Researchable UX. It's great to have you with me. I'm your host, Mike Green. I'm a freelance user research lead and digital consultant based in the UK. Over the coming weeks, I'm going to be chatting to various digital experts who I've had the pleasure of working with in recent years. They're from various disciplines, including user research, UX design, development, and product management. And they'll even be a digital business owner or two. I'll be talking to them about how they came to be in their current roles, what they've learned along the way, and what advice they may have for others getting into the field. These are intended to be relaxed, informal chats with professionals who are keen to share their experiences. So sit back and enjoy. In this very first episode of Understanding Users, Robin talks about his varied digital career, his current design work with product teams at Waitrose, which, for those who don't know, is a high-end supermarket chain here in the UK, and how he ensures UX can have the most impact and benefit on digital products and services. He also discusses the trials and tribulations of user testing and offers some tips for aspiring UX designers wanting to get into the industry. Finally, he plays my 3-card challenge to share his favorite UX tool, his favorite UX technique, and a current trend he sees in user experience. I hope you enjoy the episode. My guest this week is Robin Potter. Robin's a lead UX designer at Waitrose, and he and I have worked together in the past. And it's great to have you on the show, Robin.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
So tell me first a little bit about your role and kind of the team you work in and the kind of work you do day to day.
Yeah. Okay. So I've been a UX designer at Waitrose for about 3.5 years now. I went there as a contractor, and I've been permanent for the last year and a half. And it was always a kind of a UX and a UI set up within design team. But just in the last 6 months, we've been restructured and we've moved to being all product designers now. So we're supposed to be, UX and UI all rolled into one. So one designer per agile Scrum product team, which for me personally, I quite like. I was always slightly reticent about getting too much into the UI side. I've always liked it, but I'm not sure if I considered myself to be an amazing visual designer. But UI and visual design, they're not quite the same thing. So I've been really enjoying the last few months just suddenly having to do all the UI and produce those final high fidelity assets, all that stuff, and using the software. Really like all that. So it's been good. So we have like an experienced design team. There's probably about 15 of us at the moment. It's grown a lot in the last 3 years. It was about a third of the size when I first started. A small research team, which has grown from one person, it's now three. And then there are a bunch of product teams. We're agile, as most places are these days. So we've got product managers and lots of product teams, and like I said, one designer per agile Scrum team, product owner, developers, testers, all that kind of thing. Probably quite a usual setup, I imagine, these days for any agile digital department, I would have thought.
Right. Interesting. And taking a step back, kind of how did you get into working in digital and user experience in particular?
Okay, so I started when I was at school. Basically, we got the internet at home when I was about 16, back in 1995, and my best friend at the time, he'd already done a bit of HTML and put stuff online. Even by that point, so he taught me the ropes, and I was always into graphic design at school and good at arts. I like graphic design, and then suddenly I realised you can design stuff on a computer, put it online, send the URL to someone, and then they can see it. And so I just love that idea of being able to suddenly self-publish and put stuff up there. And I was always sort of looking for little projects to work on, like web design projects. And about the time I got to university, I did an English degree at uni, which completely non-vocational and unrelated to what I ended up doing. But I knew straight away, like that I didn't want to be a teacher, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do with that degree. So I was like working in some holidays doing websites for like family friend type things. So my best friend, the guy who taught me HTML, I did a website for his dad who owned a computer game shop in Walthamstow, and then his best friend, he owned a electronics business in St Albans, did like a local kitchen showroom. All of this stuff during the summer holidays or just after I finished university, as a way just to just to have something to design and to put online.
Right,
Sort of running out of ideas of things to make for myself.
right.
And I just like the idea of having to lay stuff out and all that. And then so I got in fairly early on, and then when I left university, I got a job at West Midlands. West Midlands Police was my first job, and it was, I think the title was actually webmaster. So that's going
Wow.
back a bit
Right.
when that was a title, and that was a kind of catch-all. The web person does everything,
Right.
writes the
Yep.
content, does the design, uploads it, maintains it. Very early days. That was about 2000. Um, and then went traveling for about a year. And when I came back, I actually found it really hard to get another job as a kind of a web designer, because just in that short period, the early 2000s, the disciplines had kind of branched a little bit. So you no longer had a webmaster or a single web designer. You had web developers, visual designers who were expected to be graphic design trained, graduates, and then maybe the more content side of things as well. So eventually, I got a job at Oxfordshire County Council as web editor, which is a very content focused role,
Right.
and that was in the communications and PR team. But I was there for about 10 years overall, and in that time, I just gradually got into what I eventually realised was UX. Fairly early on, we were all trained up. Me and the rest of the web team were trained up by a woman called Caroline Jarrett, who is done
Yes. Yeah.
quite a lot
Yeah.
in the UX space. Do you know her? So she
Yep.
came
Yep.
in. I didn't know who she was at the time, and she came in to train us up onto how to run usability testing, how to run a
Right.
card sort, how to analyze the results, all of this stuff that I had no idea about at the time. And then I got really into like the whole prototyping, sort of low fidelity prototyping, wireframing, and all of that user research stuff was all new to me. This was about 2003, 2004. But I knew I really liked it, and I sort of spent as much time as I could doing it in that role, even though it wasn't really my job. So I was always trying to get into that side of it. But then for a long, I was doing that for a long time, but I had no idea that it was a job unto itself.
Right.
Um, and I was there for ages, and then I was thinking, oh, I love this part of the job, but then I can't, it's not a real job, is it? I'm still not a designer. I'm not a graphic
Yeah.
designer, a visual designer. I'm not definitely not a developer. I can't code. I got as far as trying to learn JavaScript, and thought it's too much. I just can't do it.
Not for you.
Not for me. And I eventually, after my son was born, I was at, you have those NCT classes where you meet other new parents,
Yep. I
and I
remember
was
them well.
describing, that's it, yeah. And I was talking to a guy about what I do at work, and he said, "Oh, you're a UX designer then?" And I was like, "Oh, right, really?" And this must have been about 2012, 2013.
Right.
And just having those two words, something to search for on job sites, something to look into, and look up the job descriptions, and I thought, "Oh, that's it. That's what I'm doing. That's what I love doing."
Like a
So I
hook
do,
that you can kind of focus on.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And before that, I didn't realize it was a job. I knew that obviously your big tech companies would have this
Yep.
kind of thing going, and an information architect was a kind of another job title that was around, I guess, just before that. But there wasn't like local jobs that in information architects. It was very much a rare thing. But I think user experience designer or user experience architect was becoming a thing around that time, and it suddenly just gave me a something to search for. And then um, I started attending UX meetups at UX Oxford, which is where I met Francis from Heath Wallace,
Right.
and
That's
just
where
like
you
just
and I
got
used to work a few years back. Yep.
exactly, and that's where I met you. I got that
Right.
job just through networking. You know, I I don't know why I didn't search for jobs or really apply for jobs. I just thought I'd try and meet people locally who were doing it and find out more about it, and just see what jobs are available around or what companies or agencies. And then that's where we met. That's how I got into it really, and that was about 2013, 2014, I think.
So you've been in this game a long time, and it sounds like you've come quite a interesting route into it. I think one of the things that fascinates me about UX is the different avenues people come into it from. People come from psychology backgrounds, people come from anthropology, people come from computer science, English degrees in your case. When I was a modern linguist originally, and then did a psychology master's to kind of pivot into user experience. But yeah, interesting. So what would you say then are the kind of key characteristics or personality traits that make someone a good UX designer?
So I think personally, I'm probably, it's a bit of a cliche, I suppose, but probably empathy, just in a general sense, just
Right.
a kind of desire to understand what makes other people tick and to understand their viewpoints. Probably also quite a lot of humility. I had this kind of misconception before I got into UX full time that it would be full of smart Alex who all knew best,
Right.
and would pontificate about the best way to design
Right.
something.
Right.
But really, it's about understanding what you do and what you don't know, and being aware that you often you don't know how your designs are going to perform. I mean, you might understand best practice and have done a lot of have a lot of experience or research, but until you really talk to users and test things,
Yep.
you don't really know how they're going to react. So that knowledge, that awareness of how much there is to learn and to understand about people is probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
and what do you love about what you do? What gets you up in the morning and gets you excited?
Well, I've been quite lucky. The last two major roles I've had, Waitrose and three mobile, the
Yep.
mobile telephony, was working on things that I myself actually use.
Right.
So when I worked at three, I got, I had a three contract on my phone. I was
Yep.
working on the app, so I was using the app that I was working on, and now I work at Waitrose, and we get the nice Waitrose discount on the food. We do all our weekly shop at Waitrose, and
Well,
I've
that's
been
a
there long
nice
enough
perk
now.
to have.
It's oh yeah, it's a great perk. But just the fact that I've been there long enough now that stuff that I've worked on, quite a lot of it is live, and when I do my weekly shop, I'm actually using a bunch of it, and actually feel like I'm benefiting from it.
Right.
Doing your weekly grocery shop, but it's not much fun. You want to get it done quickly. It's quite onerous, and to be able to have those things on the website that speed it up or make it a bit easier, that I've had a hand in, is really gratifying. So I've been quite lucky to be able to do that, I think.
Right, right. And on the flip side, I have to ask you, what kind of frustrates you or challenges you or make you kind of tear your hair out in terms of kind of this world and your work day to day?
Um, I, I guess it's no one's fault, but it can take a long time for things to go through the pipelines and get live, can't it? I
Right,
mean,
right.
I don't know how you found it, Mike, but you designed something, and then maybe 6 months later it's still not quite there, or
Yeah,
it's been delayed and that kind of thing, and that can be frustrating. I mean, even in the whole point of agile is that stuff gets turned around quickly and put live
yeah,
before the landscape has changed. That's the whole point of it. But it just amazes me. It can take longer to make a website than it can to build a building. Do you know what I mean?
yeah.
It's still quite a laborious process.
Or worst of all is when you get close to the kind of it's ready for launch and someone in their infinite wisdom decides to pull the plug on it. That's happened to me in the
Oh
past.
yeah,
A
oh yeah,
large
yeah,
organization which will remain nameless. A bunch of us worked for many months on a product which we all thought was really good, was well tested, was well designed, and they just decided at the last minute to pull the product, which was a little bit gutting because it didn't seem to be a huge amount of rationale for that. But yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Um,
yeah.
what advice and tips then would you give someone who, like an aspiring UX designer, if someone came to you and said, look, I'm fresh out of college and I'm thinking of getting into this world, or even if they're older and they were in a different discipline, let's say I don't know, they were marketing, for example, and said, I love the sound of UX, I want to know more, I want to get into it, what would you say to them?
So yeah, I did. I spoke to. I got put in touch with someone who was in that position recently, who was looking for some advice on how to get into it. And I think probably the best thing I could come up with was that there's nothing holding you back from kind of self publishing work and doing your own work just off your own steam. You don't have to wait for anyone to employ you to research or test or improve an interface. You can take any popular app or website and look at it. Maybe even look at things like the App Store reviews and see what things people are complaining about or what issues people are having, and think, right, okay, I'm going to have a pop at improving this. And
Right.
these days you can just run your own research, can't you? You can rope in friends and family. You can use a test using web conferencing software. You can record the screen.
Yeah.
You can use free tools for like running any kind of research. Really, you can interview people. You just rope in anyone that you know, and then you can just redesign a commercially available app or website, or just one element of it,
Right.
and just rework it and try and solve a problem that you think is there, and just write that up. You can publish your results on Medium or your own blog or anything, or on YouTube.
Right.
There's nothing stopping anyone from, if they want to get experience in it, but they haven't been given a break, to just start to do it themselves and just show that initiative. And that's going to be more valuable than a CV. I would say.
Right. Right. So it's really interesting you mentioned Medium there, because I know that you wrote a very interesting blog posting recently about a particular kind of case study that you've been working on at Waitrose. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think there's lots of kind of good lessons that came out of that.
Yeah. I mean, the first good lesson that came out of that was just publishing. That was the first blog I published, I think. And I've been meaning to do it for ages. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've sort of often written down ideas of what I would blog about. But I think we've spoken about this before. But
Yeah,
I never liked the idea of trying to write anything clickbaity or have a hot take on something or pontificate about trying to grab attention.
yeah.
Often think what could I say that's going to be new and interesting.
Or people kind of humble bragging about stuff, as they tend to do often on social
Yes,
media. And yeah,
exactly. Quite easily detectable, and that kind of thing, isn't it? And not off-putting.
yeah,
So the great thing is that at Waitrose they've recently started a Medium account and just encourage people, just to communicate what they've been doing, and there's not any real rules on it, just common sense stuff. So then I was able to just publish an article about some recent work that we've been doing. So I didn't have to make up my own amazing opinion on things. It was just about, this was
right,
a problem we had. This is how we tackled it, and this was the outcome. And maybe you can learn something from that. So it was just quite nice to have the opportunity to just create a blog and publish stuff that we've worked on.
right.
Um,
And could you tell us a little bit more about that? Kind of exactly what was the problem that you were kind of trying to solve, and how did you end
yeah.
up solving it?
So we had a kind of a live problem on the website, where we made a change to the design. I think we moved a button, or we renamed a button or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it created a load of calls to the call center
Right.
immediately the next day. As soon as it went live,
Oh, really?
people
Really?
weren't.
It was that sort of quick, the
Yeah,
effect?
because you can imagine how many orders are coming through Waitrose every day. And what we'd done is we'd there was a problem with one of the menus, but we didn't realise how big a problem it was until we made the design completely reliant on this menu. And now suddenly people couldn't amend their grocery order. There was a bunch of people for whom this menu didn't work, had a bug, an
Right.
actual technical bug. It didn't work, and because we'd now put all of the they had to use it to amend their order. There was no other way of amending your order. It just created a bunch of problems, so we had to roll that back. Um, and then we had to kind of work out, well, how are we going to fix the initial problem? And that's right. The initial problem was people couldn't work out how to cancel an order, right? So
Right.
we made a change to try and make that more obvious. And in doing so, we made the problem worse, and people couldn't then amend their order. So we had to roll it back. But we still had this original problem of, how can we make it easier for people to cancel their order, and where are they getting stuck? Why are they not getting it? So we managed to come up with a solution for that problem pretty quick, because we had some ideas. We had sort of two ideas that cropped up, two key designs, and we weren't quite sure which one would work best.
Right.
But around that time, we just got access to a bunch of new research tools, so online, unmoderated, user testing, that kind of stuff. Um, Whereas before, we only had the user testing lab in the office, which we weren't using. This was COVID,
Right.
COVID
Of course.
times.
Yep. Yep.
And in
Absolutely.
any case, the lab is great, but there's like a month lead time to do anything. You've got to recruit people, plan it
Yeah.
all in.
Yeah.
If a session happens to be coming up in the next few days, great, but it could have been 2-3 weeks away.
Right.
Um, but now we have accounts with places like usertesting.com, which run unmoderated user testing sessions, and they have their own panel of participants. We were able to put both of these potential solutions um, through testing
Mm.
within hours. Do you know what I mean? And then the results came back for both of those tests within a couple of hours.
So just tell us a little bit more about unmoderated testing, kind of what you mean by that, for people that aren't familiar with the term.
Yeah. So we always ran I've always done moderated testing, or been involved in them. But by that I mean, like, it's in person. You have a moderator talking to test participants one on one, usually in the same room,
Yeah.
and then carrying out tasks on the website, and the facilitator will tell them what the scenario is, and then prompt them and observe and ask questions, and that's all done live. and we would, we had our, like I say, we had our own lab in Waitrose where we could, have a nice comfortable room for the participants to come to, and then we would observe it in another room down the corridor, and that was all great. That's all good, and that's what I've always worked on really. Um, but then once COVID came along, we had to move to remote testing, i.e.,
Right,
using
of course.
video conferencing software like this,
Yep.
and then just recording the screen. And actually, that made things. I feel like remote testing was a lot better. Is a lot better. I don't know what you found, but I just feel like participants are more comfortable. They're using their own equipment. They're happy in their own space, and I found a lot of the times when they're in a lab, it's an unfamiliar setup.
Yeah.
Mouse, they're sort of scared to touch anything or scroll,
Yeah.
and then sometimes they lose it. I don't know if you found a similar thing the last
It's
year and a
really
half.
interesting because I was going to ask you about this exact thing, that the sort of downsides and the upsides from the point of view of recruiting quickly, getting people more comfortable in sessions. I totally agree. I
Mm,
mean, the idea of bringing people into this building. I mean, we've all used a bunch of different labs. I'm sure, typically in London, in my case, where they
yeah.
come in and there's a sort of bowl of sweets, and they sit in basically a waiting room, and then they're taken into this room with cameras pointing at them, and there's a sort of screen on one side through which it's kind of obvious that there are people sitting behind it looking at them as they're doing this test. It's not very relaxing. And
No, it's
despite the
not.
best efforts of a moderator, it's not a very natural environment, as you
I've been
said.
a test participant once, ages ago, and even though I knew how it worked, and I knew it was we weren't even running a usability test. I was just helping them, and even then I felt so bad that I couldn't use their crappy system.
Yeah.
I didn't understand why I suppose couldn't see what to do, and then I quickly realised how tough it must be for test participants. You tell them over and over again, we're not testing you, we're
Yeah.
testing the system.
Yeah.
You can be as nice as you want, but if they can't do the task, most people will feel bad, feel
Yeah.
like they failed, feel like they let you down.
Of course. Of course. And then they get
So
all
yeah,
defensive, and and it just completely messes up your results. Whereas,
yes,
as you say,
exactly.
if they're sitting on their own at home in a in their tracksuit with a cup of tea on their own laptop or tablet, it's a much better
And
situation.
it's interesting because I mentioned, going back to what we were originally testing, that we then tested it using unmoderated sessions where it's kind of the reverse problem where you've got people who are almost like professional testers where
Yeah.
they get a nominal fee for each one they do. Each session they do probably takes them about 20 minutes and they get £5 or whatever. But you can tell they've done so many of these tests because
Yep.
they just supplement their income with it, when they've got spare 20 minutes, and they're almost too good and they're
Yep.
too confident, and they start to offer, design tips,
Yes. Yeah.
or they're
Yeah.
too critical, and you see them using the system fine, and then they sort of start to complain about stuff, and then you think, well, I just saw you use it and you didn't have a problem, so all
Yeah.
this other stuff you're saying is kind of, uh, you know, not
That's
relevant.
That's also very familiar. It's funny because on the project I'm working on, my current client is a government client. We've started doing a lot of unmoderated testing just to speed stuff up because we're dealing with UK citizens who are abroad who kind of need to use foreign government services, but need to deal with the British government as part of that. And it's, yeah, from a global recruitment point of view, it's much quicker to use some of these panels online and unmoderated testing tools.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean, just to finish off, so when just now we have access to those tools, the unmoderated testing, just because the results come back so quick.
yep.
And the great thing is, you can watch the playback. You can speed up the playback, so you don't have to watch them,
Right.
struggling through things or being a bit slow. You can put it onto two times speed.
Yep.
Skip through the stuff where they're like, it's not relevant, or the beginning and the end. I was able to review these videos in super quick time and then iterate on the design and retest it the same day.
Wow.
You couldn't do that, before, unless you use an unmoderated system on some of these online tools that are available now.
Right.
So that was just great to be able to identify a problem, come up with a solution, test the solution, iterate on it, test it again within less than 2 days. Do you know what I mean? That was great.
Interesting. So has that changed the way you work? Has that kind of experience, I'm not saying in everything you do, but is it kind of changed the way you approach certain problems?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think before, I mean, most places I've been to, we focused a lot on moderated usability testing, one-to-one usability testing,
Yep.
and those sessions, they happen infrequently, once every 2 weeks maybe at most. They're quite expensive.
Yep.
You really have to get everything prepared in advance. You sometimes have to test multiple things with the same participant, so you're trying to
Right.
cram in quite a lot into a session, kind of jumping about a bit,
Yeah.
and that's quite limiting. I think you really have to choose what you want to test. You can't test everything. I mean, we still don't test everything, but you can just test much smaller things now, like you know just little things. Is this going to work or is it not? There's one little thing. You can run a 2-minute test and just find out. And just we have a much wider suite of tools now, so that for whatever usability issue or whatever hypothesis we're working on, you can pick the right tool for the job. Whereas before we were trying to crowbar, I think, or I've the way places I've worked before, we're often trying to crowbar in a problem into the usability test scenario,
Right.
or what a usability test can do for you. But there's loads of techniques, aren't there? There's first click tests, there's 5-second tests,
Yeah.
there's all
Yeah.
sorts of different things you can do, and each one is useful for different scenarios. And having access to that full range of tools means that
Right.
you can pick the right one for the job, and that's where we got to at Waitrose, and that's been really good.
Interesting. It's funny you mentioned tools and techniques. So I've got a little challenge for you later, which we'll come back to. But yeah, that's interesting. So how, kind of in your opinion, in your experience, can UX designers like you kind of ensure you have the sort of maximum impact on the product team and on the kind of product and service that you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, a big thing. I don't know whether it's self-evident or not, but I think UX designers they have to be articulate and be able to communicate well. You're very often trying to convince people to do something, aren't you? You're trying to
Right.
convince a product owner or some stakeholder who maybe doesn't understand design or even digital, why why something should be done, or why a design you've come up with, why it's a good idea.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is about being able to articulate that and present it. It's an overused phrase, but telling a story. You know what I
Right.
mean. You
Yeah.
have to be able to present evidence in a way that people get. You can't just throw a load of numbers at them or expect them to watch an hour-long video. You have to really be able to sell what you're doing, I think, and defend what you're doing as well.
Right.
Um, so
And
that's really key.
and how do you do that in terms of kind of presenting your findings, kind of selling the story, all of the things that you've just mentioned? What kind of approach do you adopt typically, or whether it be you individually or kind of you as a team that your designers that
Yeah.
you're working with?
Um, it's kind of a skill, isn't it? Really, I'm not sure. It's almost like one of those things you have to just be able to get people on board. I'm not sure if I have any particular special techniques. I mean, one thing I do like to do, because I'm quite good at it and I enjoy it, is creating fairly interactive prototypes. So interactive things. So
Right. Yeah.
this works really well if you're trying to kind of sell a concept or just get people excited about a vision for something.
Right.
If you can prototype it to the point where someone can click around, it kind of looks and feels a bit like a real website or a real app,
Right.
a little bit, and it has the visuals and it's fairly high fidelity. Suddenly, whoever it is, whether it's developers or someone who's a bit less, digital savvy, can just get what you're going for, and that can help to build a bit of excitement around the concept and get everyone on board with it. So that's something I like to do, but I'm aware that prototyping can be quite a time-consuming endeavor.
Right. Right. Yeah. No. Absolutely. Um, and the kind of oft used term user-centered design, kind of, what does that mean to you? How would you characterize user-centered design for someone who goes, well, what does that mean?
Um, I suppose always thinking from the point of view of the end user. I mean, I guess when you are negotiating, in a work environment about what work needs to be done, and then you've got there's probably going to be people who are representing the sales side of things or the marketing aspect of the job, increasing sales or getting a message out there. And they're not necessarily going to be, that it's not their job necessarily to think about the user experience
Right.
or how happy the user is when they are using the tool. So I suppose user-centered design, is about bringing representing the customer and bringing them in, even if it's only metaphorically, into all the decisions that are made.
Yeah, and it's interesting, absolutely. And the thing with the term user is it's all very well thinking of sort of, I suppose, customers and clients and the kind of external side, but typically with services and products there are also kind of internal users. and how much of that feeds into kind of the work you do and the sort of research and design elements? I mean, I'm interested, for example, that you talked about the call center there, and that sense
Mm.
of, there's obviously a whole bunch of people internally who are involved in the after effect of the products that you're help designing. What's your
Yeah.
thinking about internal users?
Yeah. So, well, yeah. I mean, I haven't really done that much. I mean, we always have to make sure that the call center, the customer contact type people are aware of any big changes we're making, because they're going to get calls about it. So we do have a kind of process for that. The last couple of places I've worked have to make sure they're informed of anything. But internal users, I mean, I guess I haven't done that much work with kind of internal users. I've worked on an intranet before, which again
Right.
was good because I was a user of that intranet. And so one of the big things we fixed was the phone, kind of like personnel directory.
Right.
And there's another example of where I could actually fix it, something that I used every day, and make it better for myself.
Right.
So that was good. But yeah, I don't know. I haven't done much internal stuff really. I mean, I'm quite lucky that most of the stuff I've worked on and the stuff I like working on is kind of fairly mass market. So when
Right.
you're trying to recruit people to test with, it can kind of be anyone, because these are like things that anyone would use.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm interested, again, going back to, you said the kind of the call center, like, phones lit up after that
Mm.
effect. How does it feel kind of day to day working on such a, I suppose, sort of business critical part of things? And obviously the impact of the changes that you make as a team
Yeah,
has a direct effect instantaneously, as you said, pretty much on the end user, which
yeah,
is not the
yeah,
same for, I mean, for example, in my case, that I'm working on typically on government services, which take months to launch, and are, it's a very different kind of demographic and a different sort of user set.
yeah. I mean, yeah, certainly at Waitrose, we're into the phase now of we're doing continuous improvement. When I was first there, it was all about re-platforming. So just taking stuff from the old website and putting it onto the new website, which was, it was all becoming finally responsive, and the new content management systems. That was kind of like porting stuff across. So, but now we're into the realms of just continually improving it. So everything is monitored quite closely. So you want to make a little change because the customers are complaining about it, or you think, well, this is not best practice. This is an optimal design, but you do always have to be aware of the commercial impact, and you'll always get picked up on the fact, if the metrics are changing in real time. So you put something live and
Right.
someone's graph goes down, and
Right.
they're like, hang on, I'm responsible for these
Right.
figures, and now they're dropping. So why have we done this? Can we roll it back? So there is always that constant dialogue with, I guess, the more commercial teams, to make sure we're not going to tank any of their key metrics, or ruining anything. So we do have to be. We do a lot of A/B testing actually now. We put stuff live in an A/B
Right.
sort of testing format. So if we're worried about, if there's any kind of worry about, if it's going to have a negative, unforeseen negative effect, we could put it live to 5-10% and just track that, so it doesn't kill the whole site.
Yeah, and then you're
Yeah,
not feeling the heat or being kind of held over the coals by, as you say, the people with the numbers.
yeah.
Um, what about your own career? Kind of, where do you see it going in the next few years? What kind of particular skills do you want to develop, or how do you see yourself growing as a UX designer?
Yeah. So I did often wonder, would I end up in a more of a management position? That seems to be the trajectory
Right.
within a corporate setting, isn't it? You eventually become a manager, and that's just what
Right.
happens. But I think certainly for now, I do enjoy being on the coal face, doing the design work and coming up with solutions.
Right.
I feel like I wouldn't want to be too far in the kind of strategy or the management side of things, or leadership, because I love working in product teams. I love being involved in user research and seeing the user research happening, and then coming up with those, solving those problems. So I'm actually, I'm quite happy doing what I'm doing at the moment. Um, Something I have been looking into recently, I don't necessarily see myself getting into it, but is video game design. So
Okay.
so there's a whole extra. Video games obviously have their own interfaces and their own
Right.
menu systems and front ends and that kind of thing. But and then there's a lot of research, user research, in game design as well.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
suppose it makes, e-commerce or government interfaces seem simple because the objective there is always to make it easy to use, right? But in a video game, it's about making the game understandable, but not
Yeah,
too easy,
yeah,
challenging, engaging, not too handholdy, but
yeah.
just enough so the user knows what to do or the player knows what to do. So there's a whole discipline in user research now where people are observed playing games and do they get it? Do they understand what they need to do? And then are they having fun? Which is a whole extra thing, isn't it? No one has fun using a government form or
Well, we try our best efforts to remove
yeah,
some of the pain, but I agree it's hard to make it hard to make it fun. Brilliant. That's all been really fascinating. Thanks so much, Robin. I've got one last thing. I just thought I'd mix things up a little bit at the end. So, are you ready to play my 3-card challenge? So, it's the first time I'm going to
absolutely.
try this. So, I've got here 3 playing cards, and what I'm going to do is ask you. So, there are 3 top tips. So, one of these is tools. So, a tool that you use all the time in the work that you do, and you've touched on kind of some of this already, but a particular tool that you is your favorite and you find it most useful. The second one is techniques. So a kind of UX technique, whether it be research or design, that you use regularly and you find kind of particularly helpful in the work you do day to day. And the last one is trends. So kind of a trend that you see growing or becoming kind of more common in the world of UX over the next year or so. So how does that sound?
Go
I'm
for
going to
it.
put you on the spot here. Okay, so I've got these 3 cards here, so you can see that there's a club, there's a diamond, and there's a heart. And on the back of each of these, I've written either tool, technique, or trend. So pick the first one.
Okay, give me the heart.
Okay, so the heart is tool. So tell me
Tool.
kind of about the tool. Just tell a little bit about kind of a particular tool that you use and why you
Fine.
like it.
Okay. Well, given that I'm moving more into a bit more UI recently, we've just recently started using Figma, which
Right.
is a UI design tool. It's sort of rapidly becoming the main one, I would say,
Yep.
and it's just amazing. I've used a few different tools before for UX and UI, but this one is just brilliant, especially because we're all working remotely at the moment, or we were. And Figma, it's actually incredibly, it's basically a really complicated web app, and I didn't know this until recently because I've got the downloaded version. But it's essentially built, using web app technology. So it's got that multiplayer aspect where you can have multiple cursors.
Right.
Like you might have seen it on like sort of whiteboarding type software
Right.
where
Like Miro or
everyone's
something.
like exactly like Miro, so you're all moving stuff around and contributing.
Yep.
But you can now do the UI like that, so you can be designing with someone,
Right.
talking to them at the same time, and both chipping in and moving stuff around. And it's just brilliant. It's just come along at just the right time for remote working. Um, I've always used Axure for UX because it was so good at. Well, I
Right.
still do use it. I think it's unparalleled for prototyping, but for actual UI and scaling that UI across would be reusable components and having it lay out really well, and just like that collaboration aspect,
Right.
just really really good.
Figma's your top tip then for tools.
Yes.
Interesting. And just kind of on that note, things like Sketch, which is obviously another one that sort of seems to be fading a little bit now, and Adobe XD, amongst others. Kind of, what have you used either of those, and what's your view on?
Yeah, I've used Sketch a little bit. I think Figma is definitely in that same ballpark as Sketch
Yeah.
and XD. I mean, I'd never really used XD, but I always got the impression it was never quite got fully featured
Right.
compared to some of the other tools. Sketch, really good, fine, but I don't know. I never got into it enough, and just Figma seems to do everything, and be very fully featured, but just do everything really, really well and just
Right.
work. It's incredible, really.
There you go. You should be on commission.
Yeah,
Um,
should be.
Brilliant. Right, we've got 2 more cards.
Diamonds,
You're going to take the diamond. On the back of diamond is, sorry, trend. So you can see
trend.
that trend. So
Yeah.
tell me about a kind of trend in UX that you think is becoming.
Ah, I always find this tricky. I'm not sure if you agree, Mike, as another UX designer researcher, but I tend to avoid trendiness, or I
Yeah.
don't tend to look at trends, because I think if you want to, probably, but maybe it's just the jobs that I've worked in. You want everything to be as usable as possible. So you
Yes.
tend to stick to with what's tried and tested. What are users familiar with.
Yeah.
So jumping too quickly into what's up and coming and what's trendy or looking ahead like that, it's almost like are customers or users going to be ready for it?
And it's that old chestnut. Today's fashion is tomorrow's fancy dress.
Mm,
It's yeah. But go
I
on.
think
I'll put you on the spot.
it's okay. I mean,
What do
I
you think?
think in the, I mean, the thing is, I'm not really a UI designer, but in the UI space, there's always new. There is like new fashions coming along, isn't there? And something that will look old hat in 5 years that looks good currently. Um, but I just think because human behaviour changes at such a glacial pace, it's it's quite rare that something comes along which is really going to change things up. I mean, obviously we've got smartphones now that we didn't have when I started out, and I suppose a little thing on that which I noticed about a couple of years ago is saving saving stuff. When the web first started, you have like bookmarks
Right.
or favorites, or you'd have the save as function in your browser,
Right.
like tools for saving stuff. Whereas now everyone's got phones. I've realised people will take a screenshot to save
Yeah.
something if they want to record it, like a order confirmation or a recipe or anything or a photo. They'll just do a screenshot
Right.
and just that that new technique of this is how I've record things for later and put it to one side. It's that kind of it works the same way on every whatever app you're on your phone. You always press the same buttons to do it. It always gets saved in the same place, and it's easy to do. So that was an interesting thing I've noticed in the last couple of years is that idea of screenshotting everything to save it.
Yeah.
So,
It's
but that's already here. So it's not
Yeah,
a new
yeah.
trend.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? But then, we all do that, and I totally do that. But the flip side
Yeah,
then is you end up with it in a photo stream with thousands of pictures of your children or your dog or something else. And unless you
yeah,
kind of then favorite the particular photos, you'll scroll. I find myself scrolling through hundreds of photos going, where on earth was that receipt that I took a picture of like
yeah,
3 days
yeah.
ago?
I'm
Uh,
not sure if the iPhone does this already, but I think it's already categorizes out screenshots for you, so you can at least find
yeah,
all of your
yeah,
screen. Yeah, but it needs to start recognizing receipts, doesn't it? Things like that, and
yes,
doing it for you.
yeah, yeah. Brilliant.
I
Okay.
think on the trends one, I'm just gonna. I don't know if anyone's going to solve it, but I'm most looking forward to is if someone solves authentication and passwords and just
Yeah, yeah,
comes up with. I think again, Apple made inroads. They've similar to Apple Pay, they did introduce something which is a kind of authentication, like platform-wide authentication system where you would just use your Apple ID, but it still needs
yeah.
other websites and apps to buy into it in the same way that they do with Apple Pay. So I don't know. It's probably not a good thing for these big tech companies to control so much. But God, if we could simplify authentication and passwords and not have to do all that, it'd be such a huge improvement, wouldn't it?
Well, I remember, 5, 6 years ago at a large fintech company I worked at, there was discussions then around kind of coming up with alternative ways of doing passwords. I mean, this has been talked about for years and years, hasn't it?
Yeah,
You're absolutely right. It drives us all potty. We've got so many passwords, um, hard to remember. But yeah, that's a big nut to crack.
yeah.
Um, right, last one, the club, and on the back of this, I've written technique. So tell me about your favorite kind of UX technique.
Okay, fine. So something I've noticed that I always do, and I've done it for years, is and luckily because I've had it available pretty much everywhere that I've worked, is to um, we always have like a customer feedback survey that appears on the site, and it's run by a third party, and just you have that constant daily feedback, verbatim feedback
Yeah,
we call it. Free text, people saying what they did and didn't like about their experience that day.
yeah,
And I always rely so much on that. And especially at Waitrose, I read it every day, and we've actually got it being fed through into Slack. I'm sure most people know Slack is a corporate instant messaging software, and
yeah.
you have different channels for different things. So we have Slack channels set up now to feed through this verbatim feedback,
Oh,
and it
interesting.
just means that it's in the place where you're already looking.
Right,
It's naturally bolded if you haven't looked at it, and there's new
right,
messages.
right.
You can start a conversation thread off any of these feedback pieces of feedback, and anyone can be invited from the organisation, or they
Yeah,
can drop out. They can chip in. And we've even started just attaching emojis to categorize them. So this happened organically. I've always thought in the past, how do you have all this verbatim feedback coming in every day? How do you categorize it? it's such an onerous task and what your category is going to be. But
Yeah.
we've just organically started attaching emojis for things that we're trying to track or things that we're interested in.
Right.
So I've been tracking problems with amending orders at the moment, amending a grocery order.
Right.
There's been some issues with it, so I've just made we make a new little emoji and
Yeah.
then just stick that onto every bit of feedback that is relevant. And it's just a really organic, easy way of surfacing, talking about, and categorizing customer feedback. So everywhere I go now, I always try and read as much as I can, just to really understand. You're constantly being reinforced about what customers are enjoying
Right.
and what they are complaining about, and it's
Right.
always there, and it very quickly makes you an expert customer representative.
Interesting. I like that. That's really nice. And yeah, I mean, Slack's a tool I use every day as well. And the idea of kind of combining that almost, yeah, user feedback in real time into your kind of
Yeah,
normal workspace is great.
yeah.
That's brilliant. Um, do you have any other kind of burning thoughts or comments and anything we've chatted about before I let you go?
Well, something I wouldn't mind talking to you about, because you're probably a bit more in the discovery and research side of things.
Yeah.
And it was part of the talk I did for UX Oxford recently. Was we're getting a bit well. I know that probably one of my weak spots is more in the metrics and the quantitative research side of things. I've always preferred qualitative, like I just said, about reading actual customer feedback and doing usability testing. That's the stuff that, to me, helps me solve problems. But there's always a big push to prove the value of what you want to do and justify or quantify. What's the return on investment going to be? And
Right.
just recently, I found it difficult to, how do you put how do you put a price or an ROI on UX work, and how do you balance improvements to the user experience with, I mean, you're in the public sector, but for me, it's like, increases in sales, or, it's fairly easy to put, or to track clicks, or to track sales, or to track
Yeah. Yeah.
basket size, that kind of thing. But it's very hard to quantify user experience stuff beyond just very high level customer satisfaction ratings or net promoter score. I don't know if you've tackled that at all or got any techniques.
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? And it's something that, yeah, kind of focuses all our minds. I mean, as you say, because most of the kind of user research that I do is qualitative in nature, because we're kind of earlier in the piece. So we're looking at kind of understanding the problem space, coming up with solutions that we can then test before we put them live. So, it's kind of the beta live phase, public beta phase of sort of government services that the analytics tend to kick in, and the kind of study of that. But I guess it's around what baselining, if you can, kind of the current situation, the current metrics, and then over a period of time, once the new solution has been implemented, be able to kind of compare that with what the outcome is. But it's certainly, I mean, something personally I would like to kind of get into a bit more as well. It's yeah, I think there are, but I mean, it's critical, isn't it? But you'll say kind of some of the A/B testing and that kind of work that you're doing as well before putting services live. I think that's certainly a step in the right direction of kind of making more confident decisions.
Yeah. So what I found that we're doing a bit recently is we're running A/B tests to make sure that we don't ruin anything with our designs, and
Right.
it's almost like a bit of a negative spin. It's like, well, we know that the design is better because we've tested it, we've done the usability testing,
Yep.
and we're designers, so we know that we're making it better. We know that we're improving the design, and we're addressing a user problem here. And then we run the A/B test live just to make sure it's not going to negatively affect any kind of sales metrics, or or things that are easily trackable. Now we can't, but it's very hard to track the positive side, because A/B testing doesn't tell you how people are
Yeah.
feeling or how
No.
happy they are. That all comes in quantitative. So that's the challenge I'm facing at the moment. I'm going to try and dig into it a bit more.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, for me, I think it's always around triangulating the types of research you do. So it's not relying on purely quant or purely qual, because you're absolutely right. So quant will tell you kind of what's happening, but it won't always tell you why things are happening. And qual will kind of get into the user's head, hopefully, and try and understand some of their needs and wants and motivations. But it's as we know, it's very, very hard. It's kind of pointless to ask people, what would you do in this situation? There's no substitute for actually letting them go and do it. I mean, that's why personally I'm quite a big fan of diary studies. I mean, it's more qualitative than quantitative, but kind of over a bit. I guess it's less probably. I suppose you could still do it with grocery shopping over a period of time because it's a sort of
Mm-hmm.
weekly activity. But that thing about kind of tracking behavior over time, where you're not there with the person all the time, so it's almost like unmoderated testing, where they can just the kinds of. I did a government project with the DfE last year, where we gave people connectivity. We gave them like either routers or Wi-Fi vouchers, or kind of increased mobile phone data, and then over a period of time got them to use that data. This was for families who kind of didn't have that connectivity at home during the pandemic. It was obviously around homeschooling, and then track that over a period of time, and then kind of every couple of days give us a response on a really short and simple Google form. And that was really powerful in terms of kind of both the quant and the qual, kind of how they were getting on, how the technology was testing, but also kind of their feelings and emotions as they went through it. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, definitely. Yeah,
things to
cool.
ponder. Well, listen, I'm gonna leave it there. Thank you so much, Robin. It's been lovely to chat to you. I mean, it's been a number of years ago since we worked together, but this has been great. It's been really, really nice to chat. And thanks so much again for coming on and for sharing all your knowledge and experience with us all. And yeah, wish you all the best for the future.
Thanks, Mike. It's been a pleasure. It's been really nice to talk, and yeah, I hope people find it interesting.
Thanks very much for listening to the first episode of the Understanding Users podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Join me again next time when I'll be talking to Tom Devlin, founder and principal consultant at UserLab, which is a specialist user research agency based in Newcastle here in the UK. Until then, thanks, stay safe, and stay user centered.